to go back to big tech here, you just mentioned NBC, New York Times. So let me ask you this as a comparison. Would you support NBC or New York Times being forced through regulation to allow any voice on their platform, like a Stephen Crowder or whoever, a Gavin McInnes or yourself? Do you believe that they should be required to allow everyone who wants to, for example, publish a piece in the New York Times?
Right. Now we're getting to the publish versus platform argument. If NBC is acting in the capacity of a publisher, they actually do have some restrictions and regulations on when to allow people to appear and when not, particularly in dealing with elections. That I can understand. But if NBC has an editorial choice and a finite amount of space, I totally get it. Twitter tells everybody it's a service for you to share your ideas, but now they act specifically as an editorial service. And look, you want to argue about Twitter being a platform or a publisher. Facebook has gone both ways, arguing in court they're both a publisher and then later on they're a platform because they want the protections, and they also want the benefits of both sides. But Pinterest goes one step beyond in that they absolutely have an editorial guideline on what is or isn't acceptable. They've determined that a pro-life website is fake news. Okay, that's an editorial position, right? Pinterest doesn't have a legal authority over what is true or not.
No, but they do, just like YouTube. They do have guidelines that one signs onto when using that platform, which reserves them the right to get rid of anybody.
Except YouTube doesn't actually get rid of people they deem to be fake news. They actually have some kind of like algorithmic issues. And that's where we get back to the promotion not being a right, but a privilege. But what they'll do is they'll put a Wikipedia link underneath it. They'll let your speech stay up. I do think it becomes problematic when they put people's videos into what they call a limited state, because that's actually suppressing someone's speech. If you're dominating the market, if you have a disproportionate amount of control, inadvertently or otherwise, over public policy, public discourse, well, then there's got to be some protections of that speech. But to the point of Pinterest behind the scenes, we learned, absolutely has an editorial position, in which case they are not a platform and they're liable for the libel on their platform. So I think what we need to see is, maybe we'll see it, maybe we won't, someone needs to actually just sue Pinterest for what one of their users did and argue in court they've given up their 230 protections when they decided to implement an editorial policy.
Well, that was going to be my last question, because we do have to get going here. In a perfect world, how would the great Tim Pool deal with this? What would you like to see happen with these big tech companies? I'm still not seeing the consistency, for example, on the application toward, let's say, a bakery or like the New York Times, these publishers in big tech. It seems inconsistent. So clarify for me and people who are listening, how would you deal in a perfect world?
I actually do fall into the camp where I believe the bakery thing is complicated. Talking about the bakery, I believe in Colorado with the gay wedding, that's a complicated issue because you have a single baker who was asked to produce a custom message on a cake he didn't want to do, but he did. He did say he would service the couple, just not with a custom cake, and that falls into a similar First Amendment argument that Twitter has. Twitter says we have a First Amendment right to not publish speech we don't agree with. I actually do agree with that, up until you look at the scale of the two businesses. A single baker making a cake is not going to impact national or international politics. Twitter is. So Twitter's grown to a point now where the president is on the platform. Right? If Donald Trump was hiding in the back of the bakery and the only way you could ever hear what he had to say was getting in the bakery, I think we'd have a problem there. The president's on Twitter. The president isn't on these other platforms talking about his plans and his policies. And so we've actually had court decisions that he is creating public forums. Well, if that's true, then we shouldn't allow a massive multinational private entity the right to bar American citizens from the speech of the president. But more importantly, Twitter has investors from Saudi Arabia and foreign countries. Do we want Twitter, which has interest from foreign governments, the ability to censor American speech? I think the answer is no. Look, if a baker doesn't want to bake you a cake, I actually think he probably should. But you can absolutely call up another number and find another baker within a mile or two. Do I think it's right? It's a complicated question. Well, there's only one Twitter, right? There are alternatives. There are smaller platforms, but the president isn't on those platforms. So where do I go to engage in civic discourse and try and influence politicians? Well, it's going to be Twitter. But if Jack Dorsey, if Vijaya Gadde and these other executives at Twitter, including foreign investors, have a different opinion outside of the legal confines of the U.S., we've got a serious problem in that they will absolutely allow Russians to use the platform so long as they fall within their rules and manipulate our policy and our public discourse. But American citizens who want to challenge those opinions are being restricted. Yeah, that can't fly. That can't.
I noticed
you know
a trend. I noticed when it comes to someone doing the Nazi salute, or Kyle Kashuv using the N-word, or Stephen Crowder harassing Carlos Maza's minority, all of a sudden these issues are more complicated. But then when it comes to a clear example of oppression, you seem to be a little more simplistically minded. So
like what's a clear
let me return this just to the final question, because listen, I don't have the entire day. That's Tim Cast on YouTube, where ironically they haven't removed you, so they must not be as authoritarian as you talk about. What, in a perfect world, Tim Pool's world, what would you do? If you can't summarize this right in a paragraph for people, not a soliloquy this time, if you can't summarize this in a couple of phrases for people who are watching, what would you do with Big Talk?
I honestly don't know. I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I can offer some ideas. Protecting the right to legal speech. That means if you say something on the platform that falls within the confines of the law, it should remain up under certain caveats, right? It is a big challenge. A lot of people will say if it's legal speech, it's protected. I agree. However, I have no problem with Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc., taking someone down who directly incites violence, who directly sends a threat. Those things are violations of the law and can be removed without a court order, in my opinion. For the most part, though, if we're going to have the commons, if we're going to allow people to partake in democracy, then they need access to massive tech platforms without them being publishers. Otherwise, random publishers, break them up, something needs to be done, and we need to sit down and go over what the future is going to look like with politicians as well as the tech industry. But the tech industry is flaunting the rules as far as I'm concerned, and something needs to be done about it.
All right. Okay. Well, listen, I don't agree. I appreciate you taking the time. That's youtube.com/TimCast. Tim Pool, thank you for being here. Let us know what you think in the comments section as to whether you are convinced. Thank you, Mr. Pool.
Thanks for having me.